I want to make a video about talking to theists about religion, particularly the conversations where they ask you what you believe and you tell them that you're a non-believer. I'm reasonably open about my beliefs. I mean, it's not like I go shouting it from the rooftops, but if somebody asks me, I'm not going to lie to them. I tend to be pretty gentle with people. I just state matter-of-factly that I'm a non-believer. In fact, I'll say non-believer rather than atheist because the word atheist seems to scare people. But the responses I get are pretty negative, some extremely so, like the guy who didn't know what non-believer meant, so I told him I was an atheist, and when he didn't know what that meant, I explained to him that I found the concept of God and gods implausible. He then leapt away from me like I had a contagious disease. I've had some other hostile reactions, but I would say that most of the reactions I get are pretty negative. Some people seem to be disappointed. Some seem to back off, like they found out something really horrible about me. But some ask quite probing questions, which in a way I sort of understand, particularly if you haven't had a lot of experience talking to atheists. I mean, if I were to find out about a belief system or a political party that I didn't know much about, I'd probably ask questions too. But these questions quite often put me on the defensive, and sometimes they ask quite deep questions when I've only just met someone. And let's be clear, in these situations I'm not the one who's brought up religion. Questions about, say, the meaning of life, the evolution of morality, that sort of thing. And I have answers, but you usually have to think about them to give a considered response. And sometimes people use the fact that I come up with something quite simple, unsophisticated, on the trot. They take that as proof that not only is atheism indefensible, but also their very specific religion is right. Which is a tad irritating. The question I then ask myself is, would I do this? I mean, apart from what I've already said, that I would ask someone about their religion if I didn't know anything about it, but the questions would probably be something along the lines of, what do you believe in? What are your central tenets of faith? Do you have a holy book? But apart from that, I probably wouldn't. Like most people, if someone was to tell me they were a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, whatever, I would just sort of leave it, unless they want to talk about it in more depth, which sometimes they do, and sometimes it gets that way in these kinds of conversations. But for the most part, I really couldn't care less what you believe. I'm sorry, I don't care. I care how you behave. There are places for debate, don't get me wrong. The internet's great for it. Debates, discussions where you've got a bit more time to think. But just random, sometimes even people on the streets, random conversations like that, I'm not sure it's so appropriate, and it seems to be pretty one-sided. I think this is reflected in larger society. Stuff like the atheist billboards. You see signs up all the time. I mean, well, I don't usually see hellfire and brimstone signs, but apparently pretty common in America. But I used to see signs on the train on the way home from school, work and university saying, you know, Christ shall rise again. I'd ignore it. Even things like saying Christ is the only way to heaven, or there was this sign in the city, that's Sydney, saying something like, if you read too much you'll get befuddled, and there's this picture of the God delusion. I thought it was pretty funny, actually. I just ignore it. But lo and behold, you get these signs saying, you know, there are people who are atheists, and people go a bit mad. It's a bit of a double standard. I mean, part of the reason for it is obvious. It's privilege. In the same way that I subconsciously, although guiltily, expect some level of acceptance because I'm white, because I'm educated, because for the most part I fit my gender role. But I wonder if there's more to it. And the reason I wonder is that when I was a believer, in fact, I was a believer in one of the largest churches in Australia, which is where I'm from. I had Mormons react to me in exactly the same way, acting incredulously at some of the things I believed and my church did. So, is there more to it? I don't know. So the questions I think this raises are, for fellow non-believers, have you had these experiences? What do you do? Why do you think people do it? As to what do you do, I try and answer as best I can and then bite my tongue. For theists, have you had similar experiences with people of other faiths, or other denominations, as it were? Why do you do this, or why do other theists do this? Is it appropriate? Particularly in a quite casual conversation where religion comes up incidentally.